Following major defeats in France, the shattered remnants of Germany's Army Group West began their retreat across France and the Low Countries toward the German border at the end of August 1944. Meanwhile, pursuing Allied forces face a major problem supplying their troops, as the approaches to Antwerp remain controlled by the German 15th Army. To maintain pressure on the Germans, Allied command agrees to a daring plan that, if it works, will allow the Allies to outflank the defenses of the Siegfried Line and plunge into the Ruhr River Valley. It is hoped this operation, codenamed Market Garden, will end the war in Europe by the end of 1944. The 1st Allied Airborne Army finds initial success on the first day of Market Garden in capturing some of their assigned bridges, critical to the advance of the British 30th Corps. Allied fighter bombers, with entire air superiority, covered the ground forces as they moved north. However, delays in securing objectives and unexpectedly strong German resistance soon results in the Allied airborne forces fighting for their lives. With the British 1st Airborne overwhelmed at Arnhem and 30th Corps unable to advance, Operation Market Garden ends in failure on September 25th. Any hopes of ending the war by the end of 1944 are shattered. Operation Market Garden ending in failure, the Allies turned their attention in the Low Countries to opening a supply route to the Belgian port of Antwerp. To accomplish this, German troops of the 15th Army need to be cleared from both banks of the Scheldt estuary and the surrounding area. The Battle of the Scheldt begins on October 2, 1944, with the northward advance of Canadian 2nd Corps and the westward advance of the British 1st Corps. The last of the German forces are cleared from the Scheldt with the fall of Walcheren on November 8th. However, it will be another 3 weeks before the Scheldt is cleared of enemy mines and made safe for ships to dock at Antwerp, ending the Allied supply crisis. At the same time, the U.S. 1st Army begins its assault on the German city of Aachen on October 2nd and secures it 3 weeks later. Despite worsening weather conditions, the air forces of both sides remain very active. Freed from V-1 defense, RAF Hawker Tempest squadrons begin to move to the continent, while the Germans field some of their newest designs, including the Focke-Wulf 190D9 and the Messerschmitt 262. Continuing their advance toward the Ruhr River Valley, the 1st Army becomes bogged down in bloody fighting in the Hürtgen Forest. The advance ends on December 16th with the launching of the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes. The situation on the Western Front in mid-December 1944 finds the Germans in full retreat and the Allies advancing more quickly towards the German border than expected. However, with his troops fatigued by weeks of continuous combat and supplies running low, the Allies paused their offensive operations to allow time for rest and recovery. On December 16th, the Germans launched their surprise offensive with their last significant armored reserves in the West. Called Operation Watch on the Rhine by the Germans, this attack will become known as the Battle of the Bulge by the Allies. The ambitious goal of the plan is to break through the thinly held Ardennes with the 3 armies of Army Group B, advance westward to the Meuse River, and then swing to the northwest to capture Antwerp and Brussels. The hope of the Germans, with such a major gamble, is to end the war in the West in their favor. With Allied aircraft grounded by poor weather, the Germans initially take the Allies by surprise and overrun large numbers of troops, particularly in the center sector. U.S. paratroopers are even surrounded in the small Belgian town of Bastogne and barely hang on. However, due to a severe lack of fuel and ammunition and determined Allied resistance, the German attack stalls just short of the Meuse by December 24th. At the same time, improving weather conditions allowed Allied aircraft to resume attacking German troop columns, armor, and supply points. All these factors, combined with the arrival of fresh Allied ground troops, put an end to the German offensive, and the Battle of the Bulge becomes an Allied victory, putting further pressure on the German military to defend the West German frontier with the loss of more men and badly needed material and supplies. December 26, 1944, becomes the turning point in the Battle of the Bulge. as units of General Patton's U.S. Third Army break through German positions in the south and relieve the besieged troops of Bastogne. By January 3, 1945, the U.S. Third Army in the south and the U.S. First Army in the north goes onto the offensive with the aim of cutting off German troops caught in the salient. The Allies close off the northern and southern pincers of the German offensive when the First and Third Armies link up at Houffalize on January 16th, putting an end to the Battle of the Bulge. Large numbers of Germans have managed to escape being encircled, but most of their armored vehicles are abandoned owing to the dire fuel shortage. By the beginning of February, the front lines are roughly back at the point they were when the Germans launched their Ardennes offensive in December. Meanwhile, on the first day of January, the Luftwaffe's Western Air Command launches its mass surprise attack, Operation Bodenplatte. Hundreds of piston-engine aircraft, as well as jet fighters and bombers, strike airfields in France and the Low Countries in an attempt to neutralize the tactical air forces of the Americans and the British. Operation Bodenplatte, or Base Plate as it is called in English, was a big surprise to the Allies. The belief was that the Luftwaffe was all but defeated based on the lack of enemy air opposition over France from D-Day onward. Lack of fuel, high attrition, and overwhelming numbers of Allied planes had severely reduced the Luftwaffe's activities and influence at the front. Like the German army, for safety, the Luftwaffe was active mostly at night. The American and British air forces thought the air war was about over, but like the surprise Ardennes offensive itself, of which the Bodenplatte raid is part of, it was also a surprise. However, it was also just as desperate as a ground-based attack, and it didn't happen when it was originally planned. It was 2 weeks late. Even though it was indeed New Year's Day, several groups of Allied fighters were readying themselves to take off on their morning sortie, but were already airborne. Many of these airborne fighters intercepted the German aircraft, and fierce dogfights ensued. Allied planes scored several victories that morning. While hundreds of Allied planes are destroyed in the raid, the Luftwaffe sustained losses in pilots and planes that could not be replaced at this late date in the war, further hastening the Luftwaffe's ultimate defeat on both fronts. Attempting to break through the Siegfried defense line and clear the area between the Meuse and the Rhine rivers, the 1st Canadian and 2nd British Armies began Operation Veritable on February 8, 1945, the northern pincer of the Rhineland offensive. Meanwhile, Operation Grenade, the U.S. 9th Army's southern pincer of the Rhineland offensive, is delayed until February 23rd due to the deliberate flooding of the Rhine plain by the Germans. However, by early March, the Allies have gained positions on the Rhine River from Emmerich to Koblenz. These gains include the capturing of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on March 7th, German artillery and aircraft, including Messerschmitt 262 jet fighters and Arado 234 jet bombers, attempt to destroy the bridge without success. The Allied 21st Army Group begins its crossing of the Rhine River, Operation Plunder, on the night of March 23rd, which is followed by Operation Varsity the next day, the largest single-day airborne operation in history. The U.S. 5th Infantry and 6th Armored Divisions capture Frankfurt on March 29th. This is followed by units of the U.S. 9th and 1st Armies linking up at Lippstadt on April 1st, trapping units of the German Army Group B in the Ruhr Pocket. The outcome of the Rhineland offensive has been decided. The U.S. 12th Army Group advances to the east after completing the destruction of the German Army Group B in the Ruhr Pocket on April 18th. Meanwhile, the British 21st Army Group advances to the north and the northeast through the Netherlands and northern Germany. Elements of the U.S. 1st Army link up with Soviet Red Army forces of the 1st Ukrainian Front near the River Elbe at Torgau on April 25th. The Red Army captures Berlin on May 2nd, and the German Instrument of Surrender is signed on May 8th. The war in Europe has ended, but the Allies still face the task of defeating Japan in the Pacific. As was the case in World War I, The requirements of combat propelled progress in aviation, and the science of aeronautics took a giant leap forward in World War II. Speeds became faster, altitudes higher, ranges farther, and weapons more deadly. In the end, it was not just performance that won the day, but also industrial might, resources, training, and the tenacity and bravery of the pilots involved. Each side produced their own aces and legends, with stories to be passed to future generations in books, magazines, movies, artwork, and even video games. The Luftwaffe once held dominance in the skies of Europe, only to have this superiority slowly eroded by the combined might of the Allied air forces. The iconic Stuka and her sirens, which were emblematic of the Blitzkrieg, would be silenced. Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf designs would be bested by Spitfires, Yaks, and Mustangs. The German blitz on London would be dwarfed by Allied bomber streams of 1,000 aircraft, raining death and destruction all over the fatherland. This reversal of fortune and struggle to win the air war was costly on both sides. The numbers are staggering. Hundreds of thousands of aircraft were built, and countless young pilots and air crews were trained and thrown into merciless combat. Tens of thousands of pilots and aircrew were killed in combat or wounded on each side. Not to mention the death and destruction the air war wrought on cities, towns, and the countryside, where casualties are numbered in the millions. The air war in Europe, and those that fought in it and endured its effects, should never be forgotten.